Hi, my name is Piper, and my group and I are examining the focus from Chapter 10 of the Blair Reader, Is Every Worker Entitled to a Living Wage? This photo is from the Blair Reader Chapter 10, and it shows fast food workers at a march holding signs advocating for a $15 pay. The image represents the movement to raise wages for workers in lower-paying jobs, especially fast food employees who often struggle to meet basic living expenses with their current pay. The workers in the photo highlight how they see their work as valuable and necessary to their communities and believe that it should be compensated as such. Today, I'm going to talk about an essay called Millennial Thoughts, Minimum Wage and My Take by Will Perkins. According to the Blair Reader, Will Perkins is a reporter, photographer, and digital specialist for the Glasgow Daily Times and a columnist for the Richmond Register. Will Perkins writes about a range of issues from education to sports. After celebrating Labor Day, Perkins felt compelled to share his thoughts on a controversial issue, minimum wage. He dives into what it means to make a livable wage in America and why he believes that if someone works a full-time job, they should be able to afford basic living expenses. Perkins' argument is straightforward. If you work 40 hours a week, you should be able to live off your wages, no matter what kind of work you're doing. This isn't just about money. It's about respect for the role every job plays in society and making sure we value people's contributions. And as I go through these points, I'll discuss how he refutes common arguments against a higher minimum wage and what values he's promoting. First, let's look at Perkins' main argument. He believes that all full-time workers deserve to earn enough to live on, even if their job doesn't seem prestigious. For example, he brings up fast food workers. Many people think that jobs like these are just stepping stones, a temporary place for high school students or inexperienced workers before they move on to real jobs. Perkins counters this by pointing out that a lot of us rely on fast food or other services provided by low-wage workers. If so many people depend on these services, why shouldn't the workers in these jobs earn enough to support themselves? Perkins also makes an interesting point about how we view these jobs. He says it's common to think of fast food workers as unworthy of livable waging. But at the same time, the people who argue this often eat fast food regularly. He's questioning how fair it is to rely on these services while refusing to support the people who make them possible. Perkins does not shy away from the arguments against raising the minimum wage. One big argument is that increasing wages will cause the prices of goods to go up, making things like fast food too expensive for regular people. Perkins responds with a pretty bold stance. If you think of fast food burgers too expensive, maybe it's time to make one yourself at home. He's saying that the convenience of fast food is something that we value enough to pay for, and if that's true, then the people making it deserve fair pay. Another point he addresses is the idea that welfare programs are supporting people who just don't want to work. Perkins flips this argument by asking, what if we raise the minimum wage high enough so that fewer people would need welfare? In his view, if work paid more than welfare benefits, people would be more motivated to work. It's an argument for efficiency and independence, making the case that fair wages could actually lead to fewer people needing government assistance. One of the most interesting parts of Perkins' essay is how he uses personal values and metaphors to explain his stance. In paragraph 13, he talks about how he merges into traffic rather than waiting until the last second. This might sound unrelated to minimum wage, but it's a clever metaphor. By merging early and waiting in line, Perkins shows that he values fairness and responsibility. He's willing to be patient and cooperative, even if it means others get ahead by cutting in at the last minute. This metaphor connects directly to his view on minimum wage. He believes in a fair and cooperative society where everyone does their part, even if it feels like some people might be taking advantage. It's a good way for him to say that just because a few people might misuse the system doesn't mean that we should abandon the idea of supporting each other. Perkins also takes on some broader societal issues in his essay. He acknowledges that his views might challenge traditional American ideas about capitalism. We tend to believe that people shouldn't work hard and earn more, but he argues that many people work hard and still can't make ends meet. He brings up the wealth gap and questions the extreme wealth that some people accumulate. He wonders if anyone really needs 10 cars and 4 houses in different states. For him, the idea of success shouldn't mean that a few people get to live extravagantly, while others can barely pay their bills. He's making a case for balancing the scales and closing the wealth gap so that society can be more united. In his closing, Perkins reiterates that full-time work should equal a livable wage. He wants a system that ensures everyone has the opportunity to succeed, arguing that a society where only some people prosper doesn't have a strong foundation. Perkins' essay doesn't just call for a raise in minimum wage. It's really about rethinking how we value work and treat each other in society. He's encouraging us to see everyone as worthy of respect and fairness. So here's a question I'd like to leave with you all. What would happen if we took Perkins' perspective seriously? Could raising the minimum wage actually help strengthen our communities and make life more fair for everyone? Thank you for joining me today, and here are my works cited.
My name is Kylie Howell, and as part of my group project, I will be presenting my take on the essay, "If a business won't pay a livable wage, it shouldn't exist." Let's start off with a quick overview of this essay. The essay starts with the belief that conducting a business in the U.S. is a privilege that comes with tax exemptions and benefits. Here are some of those benefits that businesses can possibly take advantage of. They have business meals and business insurance, as well as advertising and promotion costs, plus travel and moving expenses, and even legal and professional fees, as well as home office costs. The most important thing a business can give back for these write-offs to the public is paying a livable wage to its workers that the business employs. If a worker in turn earns a livable wage, they can afford other businesses' goods and services, therefore promoting the fact that the livable wage is sustainable. This was actually common practice up until the Reagan Revolution headed by Ronald Reagan himself. Reagan believed in the practice of supply-side economics, also called trickle-down economics. This practice would give a 25% tax cut to top businesses, factories, and stock markets. The belief was that this extra revenue would then be invested in the public to help support this economic practice, which it wasn't. As a result, actually, Social Security and Medicare benefits both suffered, as well as weakening the power of unions. Now employers could simply replace the employees on strike, trying to bargain better benefits and wages. In an attempt to further curb inflation, Reagan's first years actually increased bankruptcies, and the employment rate increased up to 10%, the highest it's been since the Great Depression. Here's a quick example of one of those businesses not living up to their deal of the business bargain, which is Walmart. We all know what Walmart is. We all shop there at least once in our life. Walmart is a business not paying their employees enough. However, in 2012, their annual revenue equaled up to $405 billion. More recently, in 2023, that revenue reached $611 billion. And the people who run Walmart, the Waltons, who control this fortune, control a $115 billion fortune. And yet, they only pay their employees, on average, $9 per hour. Taxpayers, in turn, have to pay for Walmart employees' low salary, supplemented through government programs. As a result, one Walmart store can actually cost taxpayers up to $1,744,590 per year. However, there are ways to pay your employees a livable wage and still earn these intense profits. An example would be Costco. Costco actually pays their employees an average of $20 per hour, as compared to Walmart's $9. That's $45,000 annually for a livable wage. Most recently, Costco Wholesale's stock return rate is up to 33.78% this year. Costco's gross profit for this year, calculated up to August 31st, 2024, equals $10.109 billion and averages a steady increase of 4% year to year. This is obviously a sustainable business model, one that pays their employees a livable wage. That's crazy. Now, there have been possible issues brought up with the increase to the minimum wage, one being that there has been discussion about higher minimum wages leading to less employment and less hours available for employees when businesses try to cut corners and not give their employees benefits. There's an easy solution to these problems. The public just has to regulate these businesses. We should introduce policies that prevent businesses from finding loopholes and paying a livable wage. For example, in 5 cities in one state in the US, they tried to introduce a fair work week law. This law would mandate stability and consistency in work schedules so employees would still earn a livable wage and take advantage of the company's benefits. The law can also include an offer to part-time employees to increase their hours before the business can hire additional staff. Now, this is obviously a sustainable business model while the business still earns great profits. The takeaway from this essay is that businesses owe not only their workers, but America a livable wage to pay back the public for their business benefits and tax write-offs. Paying a livable wage will not greatly decrease the business's profit and won't create a need to make goods and services more expensive. And it won't increase job unemployment. All in all, if a business can't pay back the public, it shouldn't exist, which is the essential takeaway from this essay. Here is my works cited page, and now let's move on to the next presenter in this chapter.
Hi, my name is Samantha Gerald, and my focus for the group will be on the writing section of 10.9 that is in the focus section of Chapter 10, Why We Work. The writing Millennial Thoughts, Minimum Wage and My Take is by the reporter, photographer, and digital specialist named Will Perkins. Perkins writes about a range of various topics including such as education to sports. Perkins writes in this specific writing about his own beliefs on the topic of minimum wage and how he believes that workers should be paid enough to live comfortably. He came across writing this idea after just celebrating the important day of Labor Day, a day dedicated to the workers of America. Perkins believes that someone who works 40 hours a week should be deserving of having a livable wage. He expresses that no matter what job you have, you should not have to worry about not being able to afford to live. As he goes throughout this writing, he makes various points as to why workers should be paid higher than minimum wage. The main point he argues is that people who work a full-time job should be earning enough money to live off of, even if the job is not necessarily a distinguished or respected job. Perkins further explains this idea by using the example of fast food workers. Generally, people believe those who work in the fast food industry are either inexperienced or it is one of their first stepping stones to begin working for young adults. He states that people believe it's a temporary job you work at until you get a quote-unquote real job. Perkins then goes on to explain that everyone who doesn't think fast food workers should be paid more are the same people who commonly order from this industry. Tons of people are constantly going to these fast food places or other similar low-paying services. If people are frequently giving business to these low-paying jobs, the workers should be getting paid a higher amount. He explains that just because working at places like this does not mean you should be making enough money to support yourself. Perkins then counters his previous argument by bringing up the example of Starbucks workers. He explains that Starbucks may be known to have more expensive coffees than somewhere else, but employees are treated better. This is saying that Starbucks employees are paid a good amount while also getting benefits. Perkins goes on to say that prices might rise in order for wages to rise, but then exclaims that people will still purchase these items as it is very convenient to have such businesses. By stating this, Perkins continues to say that if people begin to complain about fast food services being too expensive to purchase, then maybe making your own food at home would be a better idea. Continuing on, Perkins makes another argument about the fact of welfare. Perkins states that people who have complaints about it would not be fair because of the people receiving welfare. Welfare helps families that are in poverty or that have very little money by giving them assistance. Perkins argues that if minimum wage was raised, that the amount of people who would need welfare would drastically decline. The suggestion is that instead of relying on government aid to supplement low wages, workers should be compensated enough to support themselves. This would ultimately be creating a system where working full-time, which is 40 hours, would actually provide a livable wage. By Perkins stating this, it is inferred that people who work full-time jobs still live below the poverty line, which creates a reliance on government assistance that may not be sustainable in the long run. Perkins shifts into talking about his own personal experiences and how after growing up he understood what his beliefs are, including raising minimum wage. He explains that in his own experience of growing up, his parents were very supportive of him and helped him achieve success. Perkins adds that when things would get hard with money, his parents would act as a safety net for him. He exclaims that having this growing up made him realize that spending a good portion of his paycheck on the societal safety net because he believes everyone should have the opportunity to be successful. By saying this, Perkins is really trying to get his point across that minimum wage is an issue that he believes needs to be resolved in our country. Also, Perkins makes it clear that societies should work together for a common goal rather than leaving individuals to fend for themselves. By advocating for this, he uses a metaphor of a car merging onto a highway at the last possible second. He explains that he is the type of person to merge early or wait in the long line, alluding to the fact that he believes in being fair. Perkins furthers his ideas by expressing that if everyone works together to do their part, we can have a successful society, even though there still may be a few people who continue to abuse the system. Perkins continuously argues that working as a team and being cooperative is exactly what the society needs to raise the minimum wage. Following on, Perkins expresses his opinions on how drastic of a wealth gap there is in today's living environment. He brings light to the fact that the wealth gap is only getting worse by each new year. Many people work very hard to just keep a roof over their heads, while other people have excessive amounts of money that they just throw around. He questions the people with large amounts of money by saying, "Do you really need 10 cars and 4 houses in different states?" By bringing this into question, Perkins is explaining that it is unfair that some people can live luxury lives while others have to struggle week to week. He finishes off the writing by stating that people should take a stand on the issue. By ending the writing, he ends with the main point of his whole writing, that anyone who works full-time in America, you should be able to live here too. Perkins' closing statement appeals to a collective sense of responsibility rather than an individual success or failure. He wants the reader of the article to understand that this is a very real issue throughout the country and rest of the world, and should be taken seriously. Overall, this writing is a well-reasoned argument for raising the minimum wage and addressing income inequality in the U.S. Perkins uses effective examples along with personal anecdotes and social observations to enhance his argument. While the tone is informal and controversial, the message is clear and thought-provoking. By addressing common counter-arguments such as concerns about price increases, Perkins is able to take those ideas and explain how society should be willing to make that change to help others out. To wrap up, Perkins successfully argues the importance of raising minimum wage all throughout his writing.
Hello, my name is Alexis Streikengoss, and today I will be discussing 10.11 of the Blair Reader entitled The Minimum Wage Solution and the Death of Common Sense by James Dorn. For some background knowledge, James Dorn is the Vice President for Monetary Studies, a senior fellow at Catco Institute located in Washington, D.C., and the editor of Catco Journal. Dorn, proving himself to be an accomplished man, discusses the negative impacts of raising the minimum wage. Let's get started by discussing key points Dorn brings up. Many higher-ups, such as the President of the United States, strongly believe in the minimum wage for low-income and low-skilled jobs and raising it. According to Dorn, increasing the minimum wage and it being beneficial for our society is clearly shown as delusional. This is due to the concept of demand, which states when the price of labor rises, minimum wage, the quantity of demand will fall, the amount of jobs and workers available. Due to this concept, if the minimum wage increases or exceeds the supply and demand factor, then workers will likely lose their jobs or even have their hours cut. Evidence proves that 10% increase in minimum wage would lead to 3% decrease in employment of those skilled jobs. This could also be due to the fact that employers will not now have to come up with this money, and why would they want to pay an unskilled worker more money when they could hire a skilled worker? In the long run, increasing the minimum wage would not increase a person's opportunities because minimum wage violates the idea of freedom by limiting choices for workers. It stops them from accepting lower than what they can take. For example, the minimum wage is $10, but an employer can only pay you $9. This becomes illegal, and the employer could lose their job, leaving them with no money. See how this could make things worse? Politicians keep trying to promise low-skilled workers a higher wage, but this is delusional if the employer cannot profit from keeping those workers or hiring workers like the ones they have. In all reality, jobs will be lost and they certainly won't be created. This will cause unemployment rates to rise, which will negatively affect the economy rather than positively through boosting minimum wage. This will happen through capital invest and the slowing of job growth. Some research has also been done on raising minimum wage. Studies have proven that the increase of minimum wage could lower employment rates. A study by Jonathan Muir and Jeremy West even goes into detail explaining the most significant employment effect of minimum wage is increasing the decline in employers' ability to hire new employees. Another study by Joseph Sabia and Richard Buckhauser goes on to show how the effects of New York's increased minimum wage played into the reduction of employing younger and less educated individuals by nearly 20.2 to 21.8%. This shows how the minimum wage laws would affect older members, not only older members of the workforce, but also younger workers. This poses a huge question for how would raise the minimum affect younger individuals. It's simple. It would lead them to getting less experience in the workforce because of the inability to the hiring due to the lack of hiring because of wage increase. Many younger workers would overall struggle to find work. What's really interesting is that David Card and Alan Kruger tried to conduct an experiment to disprove the findings of the studies. I previously mentioned that they were unsuccessful in their findings. They attempted to prove that raising the minimum wage at fast food joints in New Jersey would not affect the workers and the employment rate, but it did. To add insult to injury, they never followed up with those workers who lost their jobs. Another aspect that could contribute to minimum wage delusion is the use of robots and modern-day technology. Many businesses are laying off workers for machines and self-serve tablets. These robots are taking away the jobs of many low-skilled workers, and now the increase in minimum wage will decrease jobs even more. The major question this leaves is, will there even be jobs left if we keep going this direction as a society? In the end, without raising the minimum wage, it leaves us with the question, how can we combat poverty without increasing the minimum wage? The answer is simple. The best answer that we have to this question from this essay is simply economic freedom. This would mean expanding workers' choices and allowing businesses to freely hire labor without the government dictating the pay they receive or the terms of exchange. By allowing this adoption of minimum wage, we are allowing an economic disaster to take place. Although politicians and higher-ups might find it to be good idea and will lead to a better economy, they are delusional, and in the end, it will have a larger negative effect than positive. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Christian Ramos, and by now you should have heard all my group members talk about why we work. However, now you get to hear my essay. Now, while me and my group are examining why we work, I will specifically be analyzing an essay written by James Dorn called The Minimum Wage Delusion and the Death of Common Sense. Now, for those of you who don't know who James Dorn is, he's someone who writes about issues related to global economic policies and monetary reform. He calls raising the minimum wage a delusion. Now, James argues that raising the minimum wage would be a mistake and calls that idea a delusion. He thinks the cons outweigh the pros. Well, sort of. He doesn't exactly think there are any pros, and he tries to persuade his audience to think the same way as him. To support his argument, he recites the law of demand. For those of you who don't know what the law of demand is, it is the concept in which the price of labor rises and the quantity demanded of that labor will fall as the result. Now, James uses the law of demand to show his audience the impact of raising the minimum wage. He also uses it to show who will be impacted from it. He claims that minorities and less skilled workers will suffer the biggest consequences from this. Now, to specify on that, he suggests that by raising the minimum wage, it will become more expensive for employers to hire people, which essentially means people with less qualifications, experience, or education will have a hard time finding a new job. People with these qualifications will retain their jobs, but at the expense of the less skilled workers. And as for the minority side of things, James claimed that Black teen unemployment is currently more than 40%, nearly double that for white teens. Now, just to give you some insight, before the Great Recession, Black teen unemployment was only at 29%. Minimum wage was $5.15 during that time. Now it is $7.25. This information suggests that if we raise minimum wage once again, that Black teen unemployment is going to rise. Now, I previously mentioned that James is persuading his audience that raising the minimum wage would have a negative impact. But to do so, James uses some forms of rhetoric, including pathos and ethos, to do so. For those that aren't aware of those persuasion techniques, ethos is essentially when an author builds up his credibility to reel in the audience, and pathos is when the author appeals to the audience's emotions. Now, James built his credibility up by citing several different sources, using statistics, facts, and citing history with this topic. He also appealed to the audience's emotions by specifying the groups impacted by raising the minimum wage. If you recall, the groups impacted are minorities and less skilled workers. To summarize, after reading this essay, I can clearly tell that not only is James not in favor of raising the minimum wage, but he wants his audience to think the same. And honestly, before reading this essay, I always thought the minimum wage was too low and that it needed to be raised. But James enlightened me to a new perspective and changed my belief. But what do you guys think? Do you think the minimum wage is too low? If so, why? And did James persuade you to think otherwise? Now, I would like to take this time to acknowledge everyone in the group and give a special thanks to Alexis for putting the group presentation videos together. I encourage you all to read the essays that we did to further your knowledge on why we work. Lastly, I would like to also acknowledge the sources that helped me build this presentation, and thank you all for listening.